But on a subconscious level, you can't change who you are. And that ends up creating conflict. And that ends up creating situations where you're not happy. I mean, I was suicidal and I couldn't understand why for a lot of it. And it started when I started going through puberty. And I think it was the effect of testosterone on my body and my mind and whatever. But I was not ever comfortable being me.
You know that, right? The clap.
And
Action. All right. Today on the show, we got Jessie McGrath. Thank you. Actually, Tommy, you introduced Jessie.
Oh, well, Jessie is a friend of mine. We've done some battle together, my battle buddy on some things. I've always thought you had a really interesting life. Yeah, when did we first meet? Oh, no, you didn't know. I noticed you first because it was during the bill on abortion and trans. We were both in the fishbowl together.
yeah.
And I was like standing right behind you. And you said something really funny, and I forgot what it was. And I was like, that was really funny. And then we started running into each other, I think, at the party.
Yes.
And then I was like, oh, that was the lady who was making that really funny joke in the fishbowl.
In the vestibule, yeah.
Yeah.
It was a very trying time.
Yeah.
That time was crazy.
It was,
Before you dive into that thought,
yes.
would you like a snack or something to drink?
I would love a water.
Okay.
So I'm going to just sneak
No, I
over.
got you. You relax. I got you.
I got it.
Do you want ice?
Sure.
Strong, independent woman who don't need no man.
Well, Aquafina is not sponsoring us, so I don't want their logo in the
Soon.
That's why I have it.
We're gonna put tape over all
I have it covered with my hand.
So yeah, and you're the vice chair of the Stonewall Democrats. at the
Well, yeah,
party.
it was all in response to 574, 575. Why I even came back to Nebraska.
Yeah, that's right.
It was strictly because they were doing those bills that I decided to come home. I had decided at the end of 2022, beginning of 2023, that I was, because I had seen the dramatic increase in the number of anti-trans bills coming up in state legislatures around the country, I had decided I was going to go somewhere and fight it. And little did I know that I was going to be coming home to do that fight.
Yeah.
I was hoping that Nebraska would stay out of this issue, but I got a phone call or a message on Messenger from my former insurance salesman from Benkelman asking me about the issue because he was a former coach and thought that this was a ridiculous bill and wanted to fight it and wanted to talk to me about that.
Yeah.
And that's how I became aware of it. And then I decided to come home and testified against both of the bills and tried lobbying the senators and made a promise to the kids that if that bill passed, I would come back. And
Here you are.
And in July of last year, I bought a house in Omaha to come back and
domiciled here, be able to vote here,
and start working. And that's I think when we started running into each other more, when I joined the Democratic Party and started getting involved with that.
Yeah, and I tell my liberal friends on the West Coast, like, it's easy being a liberal on the West Coast in California, Oregon. It's just like you want to be a real liberal, come to red state Nebraska and let's do some battling.
It was. I had a friend who moved from New York to Florida.
Yeah.
To fight the issues in Florida. And so she kind of inspired me. And it was like, well, I'm going to come back and do this.
Champion.
I think it's when getting out and telling our stories and getting in front of people who get to then get a sense of our humanity that is so beneficial. And that's what I've been trying to do here.
Smart, because us liberals, we love numbers, statistics, and studies, and like, well, actually, and it's just like nobody is moved by that. Maybe we are, But like people want to hear stories. They want to be moved by stories. They don't want to break down a study that's like 50 pages long.
Well, it's very easy to be somewhat prejudiced or disdainful towards someone or something that you don't know, and that you may have a little bit of fear of associated with it. And getting out and just showing that, hey, I just lived a normal life. I think it changes the perceptions that people have of who we are and what we're all about.
Definitely.
It's like, I am not trying to secretly sneak into some woman's space so I can spy on women. I mean, Jesus, I mean, I have not gone through what I have gone through to do something like that.
For sure.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Like, do you think all the things you went through, all of the pushback, all the uphill battles just to be able to sneak into a restroom and just spy?
Do you think that I have gone through the medical procedures, the countless hours of therapy with a gender therapist discussing issues, having undergone a couple of surgical procedures, that is somehow something that I'm trying to trick somebody, or I'm trying to replace somebody? It's because I just wanted to be comfortable with who I am and who I've always known myself to be.
Yeah.
And in fact, the last 10 years have been probably the greatest of my life as far as the self-acceptance and confidence in myself that I have, that I lacked previously.
Yeah, I mean, can you tell us about that? Like, what age did you come out?
Tell us about your upbringing.
Well, I grew up religious family, pretty much, very conservative family. My mom was the national chair of the Young Republicans in 1975, and so I grew up around Republican politics, and I moved to Nebraska in 1977 when my mom got remarried. Now, we had been coming to Nebraska all the time because my mom was born here, and so were my grandparents. So it was Nebraska is home for me. And then I was a junior in high school, had to play football, which I absolutely hated. But I loved living in a rural environment and living on a farm. I grew up on a cattle ranch. My grandparents in Colorado, even when I was young, and my dad all had cattle and farms. So
did you guys have horses?
I'm a farm kid. Horses?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm on a mission to ride a horse next year. I've never ridden a horse, so
it's it can be fun. It can be terrifying, depending on what happens. But I graduated high school in '79 and came to Lincoln and the University of Nebraska. I had an Army ROTC scholarship, so I had part of my undergraduate paid for.
What'd you study?
I got my degree in political science with minors in history, English, and speech.
Gotcha.
And so while I was in college, I did internships with the governor's office, with a U.S. senator from Colorado, the U.S. representative from the 3rd Congressional District at the time, Virginia Smith. I worked for her. I was very involved in the state Republican politics. And then I decided I was going to go to law school. I decided I was going to go to law school when I was 12 or 13. I just knew I was going to go to law school.
Yeah.
Sure.
Which is why I majored in political science and what I did, and because I knew I was either going to law school or I was going to sell insurance. And I didn't want to sell insurance. So then I got accepted to law school. The only law school I applied to was University of Nebraska. I had a really good LSAT score, but I wanted to stay home. And I also knew that I could get help with my tuition. And so I joined the Nebraska National Guard. And so I was a member of the Nebraska National Guard the entire time I was in law school. And for the first I guess, 5 years, 6 years of my being a DA in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
So I was in the 24th Med Air Ambulance Company, and while all of my friends were out doing their legal training and working as law clerks for judges or law firms, and I was running through the woods in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, or Fort Lee,
lost in the
Virginia.
woods.
So it was while people were researching constitutional issues, I was getting yelled at by Drill Sergeant Rivera, and so that was my history. I educated through the public education system of Nebraska.
So, I mean, yeah, for anybody who doesn't know, you work in the LA District Attorney's office. And ever since, is that right, the LA District Attorney?
Yeah, I'm a prosecutor with the LA County DA's office.
And then when you decided to come back and be domiciled in Nebraska, you got this arrangement where you come back regularly, but then also go back to California for a little bit.
Yeah, they allowed me to telework 13 days a month because the job that I do really does not require physical presence within the office every single day, especially the section that I do. We do a lot of civil work, and it's reviewing paperwork, it's filing things with the court, all things that we do online, and we've centralized all of our filing information, all of our case information, and so any one of the people in our section can access it remotely and work on it. And so there's just no need for us to be in the office. And so, they for about a year, I was given permission to telework 13 days a month. And so I was here most of the time.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
You're a champion,
And it truly was, and it's interesting working in a time zone 2 hours different than the place that you're living. It kind of I got used to it, but it was kind of nice that I could sleep in till 9 and show up for work at 7.
We need more liberals. We need more liberals like you. Come on, this is where the battle's happening.
And it really was. It was necessary for me to be here because they brought up again 575 last session for that short bit of time, and it's coming back again. And Calth has indicated that it's going to be more than just the sports and spaces for grade schools. It's I think they're going to be going for all government offices, and then some form of legislation to enforce the women's empowerment executive order that Pillen signed.
Was that the part of the Bill of Rights that Riley Gaines was going around?
Yes, the Women's Bill of Rights, and it's to basically prohibit any legal recognition of me as a transgender woman. Being a woman, it's to strip me of my identity and my legal identity, because my birth certificate, my driver's license, my passport, everything about me says female, and yet somehow the senator from Omaha feels like that can be stripped from all of my records because it makes her feel bad.
Yeah,
and that was her justification. She doesn't want to do this because it makes her feel bad.
So what's the legalities of that? Like, knowing you as an attorney,
well, that's a lot of partially what the issue with Skrmeti before the Supreme Court is what is the legal authority they have as far as outlawing things in relationship to your sex if you're a transgender person.
I mean, surpassing minors, because that's what that one was built upon, right? Minors. Yeah. So I mean, if you're somebody 18 plus, 21 plus, 25 plus, do you know what I mean? Does that start
it goes beyond that. It's restriction of health care because of sex, regardless of the fact if it's a minor or not. And the Solicitor General for Tennessee made clear that this is something they intend to also enforce for adults. So that's why this case is such a big case, because it's going to affect more than just rights for minors to get access to medical care. It's going to affect adults, and whether or not the government just has to have a rational reason for it, or whether there has to be some not compelling state, but a substantial state interest in making the laws that way. And that's something that most of the time they're not going to be able to do under intermediate scrutiny, that they can get away with under a rational basis review. And so that's why this Skrmeti case was so key and so important, because it's going to make a determination on what the standard of review is on transgender laws.
So I'll just give a brief summary of what United States versus Skrmeti is. The case challenges Tennessee's law SB1, which restricts access to medications for minors when used for gender-affirming purposes, arguing it constitutes sex-based discrimination under Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. The petitioner's arguments were basically facial sex classification, regulatory disparity, parental and medical autonomy, and also the Equal Protections Amendment. The Tennessee Solicitor General largely argued on legislative authority, that it wasn't facial sex discrimination, and also health and safety concerns. And just to get to something you had just mentioned, I remember listening to the oral arguments when Justice Thomas raised it was a pretty troubling question, and he said, Justice Thomas raised a related question early in the argument. He asked whether the arguments made by Tennessee to justify SB1 could equally apply to the context of adults. The Solicitor General, just said, no, essentially, in so many words, and then alarmingly, the Tennessee Solicitor General said yes. So it's just I feel like that's signaling what's going to happen. Like, as soon as they can get the Supreme Court to say, oh, rational basis review, that's fine, then they'll maybe go after adults.
It will be open season on trans adults. There's no doubt about it. And that's why I was there. That's why I went back to D.C. and I sat there and watched Thomas ask that question.
Tell us about that day.
So I was back in D.C. Because I'm on the board of the National Trans Bar Association. And for the last 3 years, we have had a small group induction ceremony of individuals getting sworn in to be able to practice before the U.S. Supreme Court. And that takes place at the court. And so I was a part of the first group 2 years ago. There were 10 of us that got sworn in. And so we had our annual event, and months and months ago, we had gotten our date, and it was for December 3rd. So I kept looking and trying to find when Skrmeti was going to be argued, and then we found out it was on December 4th. So I was like, when I made my plane reservations, I made sure I stayed an extra day, got a hotel for an extra night, and because I was going to go in for that argument. Now, if you're licensed to practice before the U.S. Supreme Court, there is a line that you can get in to get admitted to oral arguments. So as a Supreme Court lawyer, you can get into any one if you're there in time. Yeah. Now, this, of course, was a huge case, and so there were a lot of seats that were given to the legal teams for support staff and other folks. And so from the Supreme Court attorney line, only 18 lawyers were let in to the court to watch the argument. The first person in line was the co-chair from the National Trans Bar Association. And they got in line, I think, at 11:30. But out of that 18 group of folks that were allowed in, I believe probably 8 or 9 of us were trans or non-binary, and a lot of the others were ACLU attorneys, Lambda legal attorneys, all people who are supportive of the trans causes. So we made up the vast majority of the attorneys who got in. So I got there at 4 a.m.
Yeah. Sometimes you do for those landmark
I was 4
cases.
a.m. and I was number 12 in line.
Wow.
So there were two people arguing on behalf of the plaintiffs. One was the Solicitor General, Elizabeth Proligar, but the other one was Chase B. Strangio, is it?
Yes.
Could you tell us about Strangio?
Yeah, well, Chase is a lawyer for the ACLU out of New York City who has been tirelessly working on these cases across the country, appearing in district courts and courts of appeal, arguing these issues. And so Chase was the first openly transgender individual to argue a case before the Supreme Court. And being able to be there to witness that was just something that for me was incredible. And because it was historic, there were more trans people in that courtroom than there had ever been in the history of the U.S. Supreme Court. Wow. Because there were trans lawyers arguing the case. There were trans reporters who were covering the case for various media. There were trans lawyers who were admitted to practice before the court. There were trans kids who were the subject of the lawsuit and other trans kids who had testified previously in Tennessee against these bills. So there was a very large contingent of trans people in that courtroom, which I think was a historic first. And I had made a promise to the kids here in Nebraska and their families that I was going to be there and I was going to look every one of those Supreme Court justices in the eye. I think I'm started to get recognized. I was actually recognized by some of the court staff who were like, "Oh, yeah, you've been here a lot. What is your, And
did you say Amy
Justice
Conant Barrett will like look at you and smile because your spot where you sit usually is kind of like right next to her?
Every time I have been in the court now, I get set on as you're facing the court. I'm set on the left-hand side, which is where Amy Coney Barrett is, and so I've literally, she and I have exchanged glances a number of times over the course of the last 3 years. Not so much this year, so I'm kind of curious as to what's going on in relationship to that. If she was just like avoiding or not, but I'm kind of hard to miss in a crowd. And like I said, there were a number of people at the court who had recognized me from my prior appearances there. The SCOTUS blog, which is like the blog for Supreme Court nerds.
Love them, yeah.
if you're a big fan of the Supreme Court and want to follow what's going on with everything Supreme Court, the SCOTUS blog is it. And their reporter noticed us in the attorney section and did a shout out to us for being there and representing, and it was a long day. I mean, by the time I got home to LA and got to bed, I think it had been for me 26 hours.
Wait, did you fly back that same day?
I flew back that same day, and sadly enough, my plane went from Reagan to Epley and then Epley to Denver. And I was like, oh my God, can't I just get off and go home and crawl in bed and fly back another day?
They don't have direct flights from DC to LA?
No. At least, yes, there are direct flights, but not on Southwest, which is what I was flying.
Okay, gotcha.
As I was using miles.
It was a Texas airline, started down in Texas. We love our Southwest down there. But okay, so one of the Matrix sisters was there, right? Or I forget. I can't pronounce their last names.
Oh, Lily Wachowski, the director of The Matrix. Yeah, it was like
Matrix the movie?
The trilogies.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, and it was kind of cool because I was after the argument and I had gone in because I immediately had to go back to my hotel and get my suitcase and then come back. I've got this Supreme Court thing figured out now. I fly into Reagan, I get on the subway, I get off at the Capital South subway stop, walk 2 blocks to a hotel, and that hotel is 2 blocks from the Supreme Court.
Okay.
So it's just like boom, boom, boom. There's restaurants right there, so it's a cool setup, and I can get in and out fairly quickly. But yeah, I had to go back, get my luggage, and then I was back kind of walking around because they were still doing some of the speeches and other things out front, and I saw Lily Wachowski, and I was like, oh my God. Because she and I are on one of the amicus briefs that was filed before the Supreme Court, and we've been on this amicus brief for a whole bunch of different circuit courts, including the Eighth Circuit, and it's somewhere between 50 and 55 and 65, depending on which place it's filed. But I think with the Supreme Court, it was 54 of us on the brief. But it was Elliot Page, Lily Wachowski, Nicole Maines, Ms. Major, Chris Mosier, a triathlete, and it was trans Americans talking about the benefits of gender-affirming healthcare. Yeah. So I was like, oh my God, Lily, I am so glad to meet you. I'm Jessie McGrath. I'm on the brief with you. And she goes, oh yeah. And
so for anybody who doesn't know, they were, at the time before they came out, they were the Wachowski brothers. And they probably, I mean, they wrote, directed, produced probably one of the best sci-fi movies ever, trilogies ever. And what I didn't know growing up, it was one of my favorite movies, right? What I didn't know was just like so heavily transcoded. And like it made so much sense when they both came out that it was a work of trans culture. And it was just like, totally get it. You're self-discovery, you know, and the duality. You're in the Matrix, but you're also in the real world and stuff, and trying to figure out self-determination and all this other stuff.
Oh, wow.
And it was like, yeah, I loved a piece of trans culture.
And what is real, you know?
What is real?
What is truly real? And the sad thing is I had been looking, I had gone to Walmart and Target trying to find The Matrix, a couple of months before that, a month or so before that, because I had never seen it.
Right.
I was a computer nerd. I was building the high-tech crimes division, the cyber crimes division of the DA's office in the early 2000s when this movie came out, and yet I somehow never saw it.
Yeah. And
I didn't have the heart to tell Lily when I met her.
Oh, it's such a great work of art.
And it was so funny because she had like a camera crew there, and then suddenly the boom mic's coming in as I'm talking with her. So I guess they filmed it, so I don't know. Maybe I'll end up in her documentary.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say maybe they're filming a documentary about all this.
One little fun fact before I let this go. What's really funny is like some of the vernacular in like the right-wing conservative spaces, they like to say getting red-pilled, right? Getting red-pilled means to be waking up from the Matrix, like figuring out, oh, we've just been taking down all this liberal propaganda for decades, right? And we don't want it anymore. We want to be red-pilled. We want to wake up. And what's hilarious about that is being red-pilled is a trans thing. Like, they don't know it. And they don't know it.
If you take the red pill, you're trans.
It's just like, that's the thing. Is like they don't understand
That's
it.
in the movie, The Matrix?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Conservatives can't do comedy, and they're sometimes so unself-aware.
It's
pretty funny.
So the whole thing with this upcoming legislative session, I remember talking to a GOP senator, and she was very, very concerned just about children, you know? And I told her, I was like, could this be a slippery slope? You know, like, could adults be next? Like, when is this going to, like, what is the end of this? You know, this is a culture war that a lot of you guys didn't come here to do. And I remember her telling me, you know, there's a lot of GOP senators that aren't going to, like, you know, fall in line for something that restricts freedoms for adults. But I mean, I think headed in with this new presidential administration and just kind of what the national beat is, I feel like a lot of people are going to, and whatever was in Project 2025, right? I feel like a lot of legislators around the country are kind of just going to fall in line with that, because the entire like Trump has such a grasp on the entire Republican Party, and it's just like this behavior and this conduct and all of like just going after people and just his threats of retribution is just not going to stop. So I guess I like to ask everybody this who has lived a little longer than me. What is
Or a lot longer.
well, no, and I mean I like I have, you know, friends who are much older than me, and I'm like, what was the Republican Party like prior to Trump? Because when Trump came into power, I was 21. I wasn't very I wasn't really in tune with just how national politics were. You know, I kind of was just living my life as just like a lot of young people just aren't. Now, I mean, like more young people are much more politically involved, but what was the Republican Party like prior to Trump?
I want to interject. I think you should probably go like right before Reagan. Like that's such the transformation right before Reagan to Trump and now.
Yeah, I grew up in the time of Reagan pretty much. I mean, JFK was president when I was born, and so we had Johnson and then Nixon. I knew a ton about Watergate and all of that. I read Time and Newsweek when I was in junior high school. My mom knew a lot of these folks personally because she had been involved in working at the convention in '72, and so I grew up around what the politics were, and it wasn't as vicious and it was not as personal as it is today. And it was like there was an ability to compromise. People were working towards the same goals for the most part.
Yeah, they called themselves a big tent, huh?
It was the country was a big tent, and
there were,
and yes, there was strife and there was. I mean, look, I grew up and saw the '68 Democratic Convention and what happened there. I saw Robert Kennedy, you know, being assassinated. That was the formative years of what I saw. So it's not to say it was all good, and I mean there were bombings, there were things that
pretty violent,
that we don't see today, but we were still much more united, and we were not as so fixated on winning as opposed to doing the right thing. And that's the thing that we've kind of gotten away from. We're not working towards the right thing. For example, on trans youth health care, if there is truly a concern that there may be some people that receive it that shouldn't, the solution isn't to take it away from all of those people who benefit from it, which are the vast majority of the people who receive this type of treatment. It's not to totally ban it for everybody. It's do we take a look at an approach that is a little more personalized and or a little more individualized, so that you look at somebody on an individual basis and you don't make that determination based solely just on a class doing away with, because clearly there are so many trans kids who benefit from the treatment, and there are actually so few detransitioners, and so few that the same ones appeared at every one of. So you talk about how these laws have passed in all these states. It's the same witnesses showing up at these hearings at all these different states, proposing these restrictions. There's a pool of about 15 detransitioners that testify on these cases, and yet you have hundreds and hundreds of kids from each state where this takes place who are there to try to get it protected. But because there are 15 kids nationwide who have had an issue with this, suddenly that means nobody can get that treatment, and that's just so wrong.
Yeah. So to get back to the question, to give you an example.
We can't have that discussion because it's either you're all trans or you're no trans. And people don't want to have those discussions because that requires work. And that requires people to actually have conversations about real life things that might make them uncomfortable. I cannot imagine Kathleen Kauth wanting to sit down and have a conversation about what's the appropriate, use of puberty blockers or something, because she is, in her mind, has got it so set that it's damaging and destructive that there's no possible benefit for somebody, when in fact there are tremendous benefits for people.
Yeah.
But she doesn't want to see that. And that's what we've gotten so much involved in. It's like the Republicans have taken, you've got to be MAGA, and if you're not, we're going to primary you. It's like even here in Nebraska, Don Bacon, who is a fairly good conservative for the most part, but he's not conservative enough for the MAGA folks, because apparently he's willing to compromise rarely, but he does. So that's you can't have that, and it's like that's not what we do as a community.
Sure thing.
We have to have discussions about things. We have to have discussions about things that will make us uncomfortable, that we may not like, but we can make better. Yes, I am scared what's going to happen this coming year. I know that the ACLU is already prepping on potential lawsuits involving a federal ban on bathroom usage by trans folks. That is probably coming down fairly quickly from this administration. So we're going to be looking at how to do that. But it's really, if you look at this from a constitutional principle, it's denying us equal protection of law, plain and simple, just because we're trans.
Yeah.
It is a transgender bias. There is a history of legislation against trans individuals. You have anti-cross-dressing laws that they've done that chase. There was the prohibition from being involved in the military that Trump had done previously and that had been done before that. And in fact, if you look at things like the Americans with Disabilities Act, where they specifically exclude, and they don't use the term transgender because that wasn't used back at the time that this was being passed, but it's like transvestites and transsexuals are prohibited from having benefits under some of those things. So there is a history of coming after people like me. So I personally think that we would be entitled to strict scrutiny, but nobody wants to do a new suspect class, and of course Alito will never agree that being trans is somehow an immutable characteristic because you have people who detransition. My response to that is well, then maybe they weren't trans.
Yeah.
And so being trans is immutable, but thinking you're trans and then discovering you're not trans, yes, I mean that means the person was not transgender, not that it's not an immutable characteristic. I mean, for me, it's like, there's no doubt.
Yeah. So to give an example about what the Republican Party was like before all of this, like the Republican Party of the 1950s, 60s, and most of the 70s did not care about abortion. They didn't care about gun rights. They didn't take these ultra-conservative positions. Eisenhower didn't talk about abortion. Nixon did not talk about abortion or gun rights. And even when Reagan was governor of California, he didn't care about gun rights. He didn't talk a lot about being pro-life, I don't think, but he was actually
while he
for
was
gun
governor
control.
of California, he actually signed legislation which prohibited the open carry of firearms within the state in response to the Black Panthers protesting at the Capitol in Sacramento.
I have so many things.
That comes back to the whole starting with Nixon and the Southern strategy and the bringing around of the Southern conservatives, and then Falwell and them realizing that
I totally want to talk about
abortion could suddenly be an issue, and that's But no, it's the Southern strategy is get them racists. That's why I always laugh when they say the Republicans and the Democrats. It's like, well, they switched.
It's
the people who were Democrats are now Republicans.
Conservatives try to say that there wasn't a switch, and it's just like, okay, well, what states fought the Civil War and what was their political affiliation at the time? Oh, it was Democrats. Okay. And then what states were the Republicans who were the progressives of their time? Oh, Ohio, New England, all them. So I guess we just all moved. It's like, Jesus.
And the worst thing that we ever did was the whole thing with direct election of senators.
debatable. I would like to talk about that, but yeah.
That to me is like that allows the federalization of those elections, and instead of billionaires having to pay off.
Yeah, but you got gerrymandered states. How are we going to get like actual professionals appointed? How can we agree, hope for that to happen?
It's the legislators.
To my friends, I have friends out there in rural Nebraska, and I would just rib them a little bit. It's like, oh, maybe your kid's going to grow up and be gay, because I know it's going to bother them, and it does. And I even suggested once that, hey, you never know, non-binary, trans, you never know. And and it's just like, to these people out there, they don't know any trans people, and they just think that they're all boogie men. Boogie persons. I don't know what you want to call it. Boogie person sounds too good. Boogie people. That sounds nice.
Oh, it's so funny. I've showed some pictures from my pre-transition to my secretary that I hired a year ago, and she was like, "No,
yeah,
no, what?"
Well, yeah. I mean,
tell us a little bit about that, like your transition, because we didn't go into it. If you would like to.
Oh no, it's we can free range everything.
Yeah,
it's
I know. We're kind of all over the place.
I'll try to take it back at some point.
Yeah. No, I mean, I transitioned 10 years ago, and it was around this period of time. My mom had passed away in 2011, and my stepdad had not gone through any of her stuff. Her makeup was still in the bathroom 4 years later, or 3 years later in 2014, when he finally got a hold of my brother and I and said, okay, I think it's time that we go through your mom's things. And so we had made plans to do that the summer of 2014, but in the spring, he ended up falling and he had some issues. And so he ended up passing away in September. And so we were back at the farm going through everything, and I was going through my mom's things and remembering borrowing clothes when I was a kid. And I ended up taking some things back. And it just, for whatever reason, it hit me at different times in my life, and I would do some things about it, but then I would purge everything. And so it had been years since I had even really thought about any of this. And it just came flooding back, and I couldn't understand it. I didn't know why I was feeling this way. And then I started finally doing some research in it, started reading about being trans, and it was like a light bulb suddenly went off, explaining so much of my life and things. And so during that November-December period of 2014, I started looking at things and experimenting, and it was at the end of late December that I finally came out and told someone. And it was my cousin who I had grown up with. She was just a couple of months younger than me. We grew up on my grandparents' farm. We played together for years and years, and it was like my little sister. And I sent her some pictures, and she was like not surprised. And when I said, yeah, I'm trans and I think I'm going to transition, and she goes, oh, that's not surprising. and it literally was, it was like, really? She goes, and when we talked about different things, it was like, oh my God, this is so obvious now. Why I did not see these things before. And a lot of it was religious. I viewed it as being a sin. And having sinful thoughts, and that it was somehow wrong. I didn't realize that it was just a natural part of human development. And after I started doing that research and started looking at stuff, I finally contacted a therapist, and I had ordered hormones from Thailand through Amazon illegally, and so I was taking those. And so when I did my first therapy appointment, she was like, "Okay, we got to get you to a doctor so that you're doing this correctly."
Yeah.
And literally, I think I had my first therapy session in February, started hormones in March. I changed my name and gender in May, and I was full-time as Jessie in June.
Was it a huge weight off your shoulders?
It was a huge weight off my shoulders.
And this was within 6 months?
Within 6 months.
Wow.
Okay, so I wanted to just get back to this one point. When you were young, you still exhibited like a trans identity when you were a kid, right?
Oh, I knew I was a girl when I was a kid. In fact, in kindergarten, I got in trouble because I wanted to do nap time with the other girls.
Yeah. So what the right is trying to say a lot these days is they're trying to protect kids. And they try to go with this narrative that, oh, it's trans culture, people are getting trans, they're confusing children. And it's just like, it's not directly comparable, but my father was born a gay man. But no gay culture out in rural Southern Baptist Texas, right? So where is he getting changed or switched, right? On a farm near the Brazos River and stuff. And it's like, that is an excellent point, that this was something that happened naturally. There was no trans culture where you were growing up.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
I mean, that was not something, and in fact, it was something that was mocked and made fun of. And so, of course, nobody wants to do that. When I came out to my kids, and I have 5 kids, I came out to my oldest first individually, and then asked if she would help me with the other kids. And what I told them at the time was that they were very lucky, because if the information that existed today existed back then, if the acceptance that at least we had was there when I was their age, if the medical knowledge and treatments that we have now was available then, I said we wouldn't be having this discussion because they wouldn't exist. I know I would have loved to have been able to grow up as myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would pray at night that I would change.
Yeah.
And
I've heard that a lot too, like people who are religious, a part of the LGBTQ community, like, feel like they hate, maybe not hate, but like you said, they would pray that like things would change, that they would be different, and like it's actually mentally burdening.
It truly is. I mean, it takes an awful lot to suppress that. Mm-hmm. And I was spending an awful lot of time suppressing my natural tendencies and who I was because it was wrong. And you can do that on a conscious level, but on a subconscious level, you can't change who you are. Mm-hmm. And that ends up creating conflict. And that ends up creating situations where you're not happy. I mean, I was suicidal, and I couldn't understand why for a lot of it. And it started when I started going through puberty. And I think it was the effect of testosterone on my body and my mind and whatever, but I was not ever comfortable being me. Mm-hmm. I did not feel right. I did not feel right in my body. I did not feel right with who I was. And when I transitioned, that all changed so much. I had like 213 friends on Facebook, most of them, relatives and like people I knew in high school and college and stuff. And I now have like 6,000 people who follow me. Why, I don't know, because I don't think I'm that interesting of a person, because I live my life and it's like, oh, okay.
Jesse.
Yeah. But then again, I think, I did talk to Lily Wachowski outside the U.S. Supreme Court. That is kind of a cool thing.
Jesse, you're a badass. Like you were in, was it The Guardian? You were in 2 publications, major publications.
Yeah,
recently.
AP did a photojournalism piece on me, and then The Guardian.
But you're not interesting.
What's that?
You're not an interesting person, right?
Apparently, some people think I am. I still have a hard time.
The AP does not call you for a photo story if you are not somebody, or if it's not like a huge thing.
I understand. You can't let it go to your head.
The AP is known for like their photos, right? Like,
Yes.
that's like the AP's like world-class photojournalism. Like, that's top of the line.
Well, and now I see myself on, I every now and then I'll run my name, and I see myself showing up on newspaper articles about trans issues with one of the pictures from the photo shoot.
Dude, yeah. Like, Googling yourself is wild. If you Google yourself now, this show will probably pop up.
You know what happens when I Google Thomas Blanton?
What?
So there was a white KKK terrorist who bombed a black church.
Goodness.
That's what I get. So no, it's not fun Googling yourself. You can,
I googled myself one time, and I guess there was like this whole Reddit thread like of people talking about me that didn't know, and it was like one of my old coworkers, and this is when I was like trying to get involved with like local politics and stuff, and he was like, "Wow, the last time I spoke to this dude, he wanted to be he's like from Ethiopia and has wanted to be a rapper," and I'm like, I'm not Ethiopian, and I've never wanted to be a rapper. There was a period of time where I wanted to become a singer, and that's where the name Jazari came from. But like, I'm not from Ethiopia, and I never I don't have bars like that. So it's just like it's wild to see the conversations people have about
just
you.
wild.
And I'm just like, that just goes to show that you really did not pay attention the time that we worked together at Best Buy.
Well, I saw Yahoo News did a repeat of the AP story, and there were allowed comments on that. And I saw so many comments from folks that were just wrong because it's a short little piece, and they don't go into all those things, and I think there was a Reddit one or some other one where they were talking about how, that's, the self-serving, finally getting something. And it's like, no, once I started my transition, I realized that, I do have incredible privilege, and I do know that I have to help a lot of other folks. So the fact that I stayed a Republican for a number of years, it wasn't because I believed in the Republicans. It was because I didn't want to have to go through the effort of changing my voter registration, and it was kind of an homage to my mom, and it caused the Republicans to spend money on me, even though I didn't vote for them. Mm-hmm. So, but they were like, "Oh yeah, you're doing it." It's like, look, there was a reason why I didn't change it before I changed it, and it wasn't because of my politics necessarily. It was because I just thought that, it was part of my identity for so long. Mm-hmm. But I obviously did not support those folks.
Yeah.
But so there's a lot of misconceptions, saying, oh, well, now you're just doing it. And it's like, no, I've been this way for a long, long time, realizing that I am not a typical trans person in a lot of respects, and that I did not lose my job. I kept my job. I have a very responsible job that is a position of great responsibility. Yeah. I bring in millions of dollars to law enforcement agencies and government agencies, and so the fact that I've been able to do what I've been able to do and keep in working and get out and fight, it's something that I feel that I owe to all of the trans folks who came before me, because there were so many trans people who had their heads beaten in by cops, the Compton riots, Stonewall, and so many other in the streets. Fighting and people getting before the legislatures and changing these laws years and years ago, and now suddenly they're wanting to redo those changes that were made years ago, mostly bipartisan. This was not a political wedge issue, 20 years ago when they changed some of the laws regarding, how you can do your IDs and what you need to do in order to change the gender marker on your identifications. Yeah. And so this was all kind of settled, 10, 15, 20 years ago when these laws were all changed, but now suddenly they want to undo all that.
Yeah. So to me, I have friends from the trans community who just want to be left alone. They don't want to be out and open because of the fear of retribution and backlash and all that stuff. So when I look at them and I look at you, I go, it's really important that somebody's out there and like showing up and not afraid. I think that it's a huge thing for moving the Overton window. And one of these days, perhaps trans people won't have to worry about hiding so much. So it's really important to be one of those people who is willing to put themselves on the front lines.
And I feel that, like I said, that's a debt that I owe to those people who got their heads beaten in before me. It's an incredible disservice to not stand up and support what they worked for so hard, for so long. And because I do have that privilege, I do have that job, I could understand why people, and I know a lot of people who just want to blend in. They don't want to make this an issue. It's not anything that they feel that they have to fight. And I understand.
When I think about it, of course, from my perspective, it's like if people could have been in a position to be out when my father was a child in rural areas, like, I see more and more gay people coming out.
Oh, and they were there.
No, they were always there.
And I know people from my incredibly small county that were that way. It's kind of weird. Robin Stevens, who was on the State Board of Education from out in Gothenburg, was my high school basketball coach. And he had two of his starters were LGBTQ. Me and the guy who started at Center, who's a gay man. And so we were there.
Yeah, I just think that
we didn't have community.
He was in, so that's another thing, is he was born in rural Southern Baptist Texas, didn't have a chance, right? And victim of conversion therapy. And my grandfather on his deathbed was begging for my forgiveness. Like, he had to open up about that. And he's like, I've always regretted it. I tried supporting your father after I figured out I was wrong. And he's just like, I'm begging your forgiveness. Like, your father's rough life was because of the mistakes I made. To look at you and to think, if there was somebody around in that area of the country at the time who could have been in a position to make this seem more acceptable. Like, my grandfather was a smart guy. He became.
It's just a part of normal human interactions.
He became quite liberal later in his life. He just didn't understand, and he believed his religious upbringing that he was trying to save my father. And by the time he'd already realized it was too late.
And that's what makes it so difficult with these conversations, is because the people who are trying to pass these anti-trans laws, I think, do it from a sincerely held belief that they're doing something good, when in fact what they're doing is incredibly harmful.
Yeah.
I don't know about like Kaus, but there's like a whole website or like a list that shows different legislators around the country who helped pass laws like, restricting LGBT, like pretty much oppressing that community. And this registry is specifically people who later came out, and they felt that them going into their state legislatures and like passing these laws or things like that was in a way to like, what is it, like projecting?
It's.
But you get what I mean? It's just kind of like, that was like their way of like trying to like deal with what their emotions were.
Yeah.
There's the self-loathing that you get from thinking you're not right.
And then some of them have gone on to like try to advocate to have those laws overturned.
It's a confusing identity, I bet, trying to be a conservative Republican and then having all these conflicting feelings. And plus, those are the ones who can sometimes be the harshest because they're trying to like suppress themselves.
Overcompensate.
Yeah. And the thing is here's a little rule of thumb. If you look at a conservative Republican who's always talking about how DC is an awful cesspool, it's a terrible place, it needs to be fixed, so keep sending me back for 20 plus years to this awful place. That's a good rule of thumb that those people are swinging a leg over the other fence. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, hey, I'm not going to...
Tony's catchphrases.
I'm not going to say what her name is, but I have a friend from the trans community who is a sex worker in DC, and she's got some clients who are GOPers, and she has some great stories. Like these, she says that some of her clients will go on the floor of the house and just rail against the queer community. And then as soon as the cameras are off, they'll come see her and they'll be like, "That's not me. It's a thing. I'm sorry. It's not my thing."
That's my character. I play in the Congress.
She got stories?
She ain't coming on.
I was going to say.
She gets paid too much to
send her on in.
She gets paid too much to give up to give up on us.
And there are some names, if you get out, then the people disappear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, she would lose she would lose the life that she wants. I mean, and, we're talking it's not a bad life. No, I'm saying she lives in a nice place. She has nice things. She is in the upper class.
Wow.
I'm telling you, man. It's like, what was it? Elliot Spitzer, governor of New York. He came out, like, he got caught in a high-class prostitute ring. I want to say it's Elliot Spitzer.
Like the Mayflower Madam thing part of that?
Something like that. There are, like, these incognito, high-class call services.
Oh, yes.
And all of the politicians know who, if they want it, they're going to get it, that sort of thing. And that's one of the secrets about D.C. is, like, it is a cesspool, debauchery, and it's awesome.
That's wild.
Yeah.
I guess I'm not surprised. I mean,
It's an incredible amount of hypocrisy that exists.
So if you see a certain Congress Republican is always telling you about how D.C. is terrible, but they've been getting sent back for 30 years. Wink, wink. I didn't say anything.
Oh,
anyways.
Man.
Oh, yes.
Fun
Are
little
we
tangent.
talking about Lady?
Let's not. Yeah. I guess to get back to the case, what was your take on the justices who tipped their hands?
Well, obviously, there were some who we knew exactly where they were going to be coming from right out the gate. And, Alito with his, insistence on, if somebody is gender fluid, then obviously that means that being trans is not immutable.
Yeah.
Well, except that being gender fluid for that person is an immutable characteristic for them, and that there's some incongruence with their birth gender, which is what being trans is all about. And and there are many different ways, and yes, it's an umbrella term, but by the same token, how do you legislate on that spectrum? As far as does a cross-dresser who's very comfortable with their gender, does that qualify as somebody who gets protection under transgender status? Well, maybe for employment, but for other things, I don't know. Like I said, there's a lot of hard conversations that could be had about this if people were truly interested in trying to find solutions for all of this. But the thing is there are some people who aren't. The only solution for them is eradication.
Yeah. So there's no intellectual way of putting this. Alito's a hack. Okay. That guy cannot keep a consistent argument. So I had in my notes that he would talk about, they're changing how they do this in Sweden and the UK. And Proligar was like, yeah, they are having changing ideas and all like that. But you know what they're not doing? Total bans on gender affirming care.
Yeah.
And he just ignores that.
And it's like, well, every place that you're talking about where these laws are changing have been taken over by right-wing governments.
Yeah.
And it's the right-wing government officials who are coming in and making the changes, not people from the medical professions and things like that, unless they're the medical professionals who all along have not supported gender-affirming care.
That happens too.
And relying on the Cass report, which basically, and I was sitting there when some of those questions were coming down about that, about a lack of high quality studies. I'm like, explain the grade system, because most people do not understand what the grade system is in healthcare. High quality tests require generally some form of blind control group, which you can't do in looking at gender-affirming care, because a kid will know if they've been given a placebo or a puberty blocker.
Yeah.
A kid will know if they're getting estrogen or a placebo, because the changes won't. So it's truly unethical to conduct these types of tests. So you then have to go down on the scale, and something like 85% of all medical knowledge is based on low quality studies, because it's not because they are low quality studies, it's because that's how they're defined within the grade system, because they don't have blind control groups. They don't have certain things. And that is what the vast majority of medical research is done with.
Yeah.
And medical treatment is all based on those types of things. It's the same way with the off-label usage. 90% of things that are treated in this country are treated off-label usage from medications. I think isn't it Viagra was not originally designed
blood pressure.
It was a blood pressure
Something like
medication
that. I might be wrong about
gave
that.
people hard-ons, and so if you're going to go after off-label usage, I mean, let's stop the Viagra, because that hasn't been tested.
Yeah, and one of my fun little facts about medical studies is for decades, maybe even like over a century, is there were a lot of medical studies done excluding women, and the assumptions were just made that women were basically just small men in a ton of studies, medical studies. The takes that I had just listening to oral arguments, like, okay, so some notes here. Thomas was trying to make the argument that this is an age classification discrimination. And for anybody who doesn't know, you can discriminate on the basis of age. Like, I think it's anybody under 40 you can discriminate, ageism laws.
Yeah, but it's clear that is one component, is that it is age, but you can't, if there's another characteristic that also, and that's what the Solicitor General's argument is that even though there may be legal classifications, if there is the illegal classification based on sex, which is what this bill is based on, then it doesn't matter. Yeah.
Chief Justice John Roberts, his usual cop-out is this going to be judicial overreach? Shouldn't we leave this to the legislatures? He's got the gerrymandered legislatures. Kavanaugh emphasized the need for judicial caution, basically the same thing. So, I mean, I'm thinking the four of, like, between Thomas, Alito, Roberts, and Kavanaugh, I think that they're going to uphold it.
We may get Roberts, depending on how who gets to write the opinion. Yeah, the question is, are we going to get Gorsuch and Barrett?
I couldn't get a beat on them at all. Like,
and I actually, at least Barrett asking a question that would lead to strict scrutiny was a surprise.
I must have missed that.
Well, yeah, talking about the suspect class, and
that was a very interesting thing. Is like they started like talking. Well, maybe transgender people should be considered a suspect class. Can you tell us what a suspect class is?
And I think we are a suspect class. There's no doubt that we lack political power. There is no doubt that we have a history of discrimination. We are. It's an immutable characteristic. At least it is for me. Is it for every trans person? I think to a certain extent, even people who detransition. One of the things that truly bothers me about the leaving it to the states are, we had 4 hours of public hearings in reference to 575 or 574, and then we had 10 hours or whatever of public comment for the state medical board, but yet we have no idea where these decisions came from as far as what they put as far as restrictions here. However, most states, they're just banning them based on literally 4 hours of testimony.
Yeah.
And that's it. Whereas, is it important for the courts to get involved, and is it important to have a higher level of scrutiny? It is, because you then get to investigate through admissible evidence, and evidence that is real and admissible, which you don't get in legislative hearings. That's why getting it into the court context is you can get into those discussions of what is the actual facts in relationship to detransition status? Is it the 80% that was being thrown out in the argument by Tennessee, which is based on a study out of Sweden that is decades old and did not study transgender people? It just studied kids who were somewhat gender non-conforming, not kids who identified as trans. And most of the kids who were, somewhat gender non-conforming when they were 6, when they were, 15, they were comfortable with who they were. So those are not people who are detransitioners or desisters, because they're not people who were interested in transitioning to begin with, who they were just identified through whatever person. So the studies that have taken place on individuals who have undergone gender affirming care, or who have identified as transgender and who detransition, it runs somewhere between 1% and 3%. And of the people who detransition, the majority of them, based on studies through the Anderson School at UCLA, or the Williams Institute at UCLA, along with, at the time, it was the National Center for Transgender Equality, did the annual trans survey, and it shows that the vast majority of people who detransition do so for societal pressure reasons, family unacceptance, loss of a job. It's not because they're not trans, it's because they discrimination and other things that they face from a hostile world. So the fact that people who do transition are pretty solid in our identities, especially people who undergo medical treatment, it certainly would seem that we are a suspect class.
Yeah, for sure. And at this point, if there's any conservatives watching, I think that they would look at us and just, hand wave us away as like, oh, look at the radical trans activists. And it's like, I want to put it in terms that they understand. And growing up conservative, like, this is something I fully believe. What's the whole point of the Constitution if not individual liberty and self-determination? And I'm not here to say that trans rights are more important than anybody else's civil liberties, civil rights. I'm saying everybody's civil rights. Their rights to self-determination.
It's equal to everyone's. It's not more. It's not better. We're not getting more. It's not like we're cutting up a pie. It's do I get to participate equally in society?
Yeah, and
that's what it amounts to.
I get really patriotic when I think about this. It's like these individuals are trying to fight the government overreach, tyranny, right? And they're trying to stand up for civil rights. It's very similar to all the civil rights movements beforehand, without getting into a complicated situation, but it's just like, that's what it is.
I find it ironic that the champions of the anti-COVID restrictions are now suddenly pro-governmental interference in medical treatments within families.
Yeah, but
it makes no sense.
It just needs to be said that people are just trying to stick up for their rights. And if this was happening to you, when it comes to gun, I'm a kind of a strange liberal. If somebody's trying to take your guns away and you're a law-abiding citizen, absolutely not.
And that's a concern that I have, is potentially my Second Amendment rights being attempted to be taken away by suddenly a reclassification of me as being somehow
freedom of expression.
Mentally ill to the extent that I'm not allowed to own firearms. I've owned firearms my entire life. I have a lot of guns, and I have no desire to go out and commit mass killings with any of those. I just simply love being able to shoot.
Yeah.
I was an armorer in the Army. I had the keys to all of the M4s at the Lincoln Airport at the air ambulance company out there, because I was the armorer.
Yeah.
I like guns. I have fun with guns. I like shooting them. And all of my guns are defective because they haven't killed anybody, and I pray to God they stay that way.
Yeah.
I never want to be able to have to use it, but if I have to use it, I want to have it.
So that's just what I want to say to my conservative friends. Is like, I would be fighting as hard as I could for you if something like this was happening to you.
Mm-hmm. I feel like I need to get a pew-pew too.
He doesn't like saying the word, I guess.
I don't know, like
gun, weapon.
I just don't know, social media, banning and taking things down. So,
No.
You say pew pew, you say unalived. Like,
I don't know.
you've heard like these phrases, right? Like,
Yeah.
I'm not into politically correct speech, to be honest.
well, I mean, it's not.
Yeah, it's their platform. They get to do what they want, right? But no, I honestly think that everybody should try to exercise all of their rights. You know,
And that's one of the things that I want to do this coming year is try to teach more queers and people in the LGBTQ plus community basic gun safety and how to fire a gun if it comes to that point, because I think it's something that we're all going to potentially need. And look, Nebraska passed constitutional carry, unlicensed concealed carry, and I have exercised that right here in the state. I have not yet open carried at the Capitol like so many folks do, like Kurt Penner, I know from the State Board of Education, will open carry. I know there's other governmental officials who show up there and open carry. And I guess they're ready for, the trans prosecutor from LA to show up with
every
40
time,
cal on her hip,
Every time I go to like a rally, women's rights rally or LGBT or anything that's kind of a hot button issue from the liberal side of things, I always conceal carry.
Do you really?
Oh yeah. I'm not going to a trans rally unarmed.
It just doesn't make sense.
It's like, why would you want to do that? Like, that's the likely, and also like open spaces, crowded spaces, like a farmer's market. And, I don't take it to the supermarket though, and I don't conceal carry and carry a gun all the time. Mm-hmm. And I don't like to open carry, and I never really have, because I do feel like some people do get intimidated, and like to be able to make them feel okay about it requires a lot of input. So I just don't want to have anybody think I'm trying to intimidate them. So that's why I don't open carry. But
there's also just like the president, like, I don't know. I saw this one time. It's just like when you see, hate to make it racial, but like if you see a group of like white men like walking down protesting and, carrying ARs or whatever, it's kind of just like a thing. But if you see like 20 black men doing that, like people are just like, oh, like.
I feel the same way.
Crazy.
Yeah.
In both situations, I feel like they're trying to intimidate somebody.
You feel the same way?
No, I feel like
in both situations?
The reason why I don't open carry is because I feel like it's used as a way to intimidate people.
Used as an intimidating factor.
Yeah,
tactic.
and that's
A
not the
scare
way it's
tactic,
supposed to be.
And that's, frankly, that's what I'm going to do when I wear in the Capitol this coming session.
Yeah.
I am going to talk with the State Patrol there and find out if I have to check in advance or if there are any places I can't go, what the rules are.
I don't
Obviously,
think you do.
but it's...
I mean, you could carry it inside the vestibule.
I don't know if you can take it inside the fishbowl.
You can.
Can you?
You can, but you can't have signs in there.
One of my favorite stories, gun rights stories, it wasn't just the Black Panthers, but this group of black gun owners did a protest at the California state legislature, and they took all their shotguns. They had them open action, right? I forget the terminology. They open action, unloaded, and they just carried it over their shoulders while they did a march and that scared the white people. Oh man, Reagan was the governor at the time. They passed gun control laws.
They banned open carry of firearms.
Yeah. Ronald Reagan was into gun control.
I'm telling you, it's just that.
Yeah, you arm certain communities.
Ronald Reagan also signed the Gun Reform Control Act of what was it?
80 something.
78 or something,
78.
where they changed the rules in relationship to ownership of automatic weapons, and so they're prohibited for any that are manufactured before 1986, I think it was.
This is a little gallows, so I'm gonna cut this out if you don't want to. But it's just like, man, if all those school shooters weren't white guys, maybe if it was a different demographic, then maybe we'd see some action. You know what I'm saying?
It's like there's all these things, trans women commit these acts or whatever, and it's like, so we need to prohibit all. And I'm like, well, if that's our standard, why are men walking around in this? Because last I saw, they commit 95% of all the violent crimes that
Yeah.
take place, they commit
School shootings,
almost
yeah.
all of the rapes, they commit almost all of the murders. So why are we letting men walk around free? Because obviously they've shown that men as a class are incapable of being able to control themselves.
If I can go to a cool camp, I'm okay with it, you know? Like a cool one, a cool camp, like a summer camp. For all just men, just get us away from society. No.
So it's like they make these arguments that are just asinine because
You know what
they don't cross to other. It's just a way to come after somebody that they're uncomfortable with.
So that recent school shooting in Madison, people like started a conspiracy theory that the person who perpetrated it was trans.
Oh, the last 5, I think, mass shootings.
Were they trans?
They've all of them tried to claim that it's a trans person
It's nuts.
because they definitely, I think, they want to take away our Second Amendment rights. And it's like, well, if we're going to do it based on the number of people that do it, then the first people who should not have guns are white men.
Yeah, let's not start talking now. I'm Hispanic. We don't get our own race. We're all white too on the government form. So shoot.
So you're going to be here a lot for the session coming up?
I'm
Or as
waiting
much
to
as you
find
can
out
be?
as much as I can be. I still don't know what my telework schedule, if I'm going to be allowed to telework under the new administration. And then
Same.
obviously, come the end of March, I can be here as much as I want because I'm not going to have to be in an office unless, of course, I somehow get convinced to stay. But I
Wait,
don't
what's
see that
happening in
happening.
March?
I'm retiring after almost 37 years with the DA's office.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I'm at the point where I'm going to start working for free because my retirement pay is equal to what my pay is.
Sure.
And so it's like,
Dang, Jesse, you're well off, huh?
I somehow managed to luck into a really, really good job, almost 40 years ago. And
You got a 4-bedroom house in LA?
I got a 4-bedroom, 3,200 square foot place in LA that I have a 2.25% mortgage on, and
In Los Angeles.
Monarchy.
my payment, including taxes and insurance, is less than $3,000.
My wife got a really low interest rate.
So
on her house.
I do have at least a little bit of good luck in that regard.
I'm guessing you use a couple of those rooms as guest bedrooms, right? Like, can we crash at your place if we come to LA?
So just to go to like more current events,
I'm guessing no.
what are your takes on the current fiasco in the U.S. House right now?
The what?
The current fiasco, the government shutdown,
Oh God!
came out of nowhere, right?
It's like, who the fuck elected Elon Musk?
Elon Musk elected Elon Musk.
It's like this dude spent all this money, bought
$300 million.
a fucking app to just
Because he had to.
play out politics. Well, he had to because his daughter transitioned and his ex-wife left him for a trans woman, and so
No,
he
it's-
wanted
Wait,
to.
seriously?
No.
Oh
the
yeah,
reason-
so
the reason
that's
why he
why
bought-
that's why he allows all of the trans hatred and attack and other stuff on Twitter. But then he's also using it to do all these other
Well,
things.
he was technically forced to buy it because he started tweeting about
buying it.
buying it, and then I don't know if
pulled out.
Twitter was and then they were like going to go into a suit because they had some kind of agreement that was
Oh
enough.
yeah, no, he got sued
And,
he
like-
tried to back out,
And he's like, okay, now we go into discovery, and he's like, nope, I'd rather spend $40 billion. It's like, ooh, what do you got going on there, man?
and I think a lot of it is he wanted to support the anti-trans crap that's going on there.
Calls it the woke mind virus.
Because he dead names his daughter.
I mean, but he's a terrible parent. He's an absentee father. It's pretty clear. And it's just like, maybe if you knew your kid, you'd understand there's no such thing as a woke mind virus, dude.
Yeah.
Maybe you'd understand what a red pill really means. But, I mean, it's just like it came out of nowhere. And Speaker Johnson's not going to be the speaker. I mean, he messed up.
It's interesting what's going to happen.
Who's gonna be
It's
the next speaker?
Are they even going to be able to elect a friggin' speaker?
Yeah, they only got a 3-vote cushion they lose 4 Republicans. They don't.
Yeah,
they have
even
anything.
after everything with McCarthy, like what was it, like 16 rounds to elect him speaker, and
So
then
embarrassing.
after he was forced to vacate the chair by Matt Gaetz because he didn't want to
That
He didn't
ethics
want the
report.
report released.
Yeah.
And
And we're
the
getting
report
it
is still
anyways.
going to get released anyway.
Yeah, and then they run Kevin McCarthy out of Congress, or he's just
Humiliation.
like, I'm done.
Kevin McCarthy had a humiliation kink.
What did you think of him as a politician?
The wet blanket.
I didn't pay much attention to
Not the worst, I
You don't,
guess.
yeah, I mean, like, you don't think he was like an effective legislator?
No. He couldn't keep.
Obviously,
I mean,
because he got voted out
I
rather
mean,
quickly.
you're talking John
Yeah.
Boehner, Paul Ryan.
Okay,
Nobody can
Let-
keep the
all right.
Freedom Caucus under
Okay, that's what
control.
I'm saying. So, like, the more moderate, would you consider Kevin McCarthy moderate?
I think I'd consider him opportunistic.
So, like, you know, when you have people like that, when you start running people out, like, yeah, I know you don't like the Cheneys, but like Liz Cheney, like people who he does not like the Cheneys. But what I'm saying is, like, you know, you're having like the extreme side start like pushing out, you know, the people who have like been there, the more establishment people. So
the
it's just
people
like,
who will actually get things done.
yeah, that's what
who
I'm
will
saying.
actually be able to have conversations with other folks.
Yeah.
People who are not just totally blinded by the singular agenda that the Freedom Caucus folks seem to have, and they've done nothing but just blow up Congress, and it's
that's-
been totally ineffective.
They're true believers. Got to give them that.
And I mean, Kevin McCarthy working with Hakeem Jeffries is the only way the debt ceiling got raised last time.
Yeah.
Because what would have happened? Like, what would have happened if the U.S. defaulted? on its
Nobody
debt?
really knows, and they don't want to know.
Well, I think it would just cause mass pandemonium in terms of like just.
It's technically defaulting on.
That's what
It's
I'm
defaulting,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's defaulting. So it's just like, what would happen after that? Like, people would lose. I don't know.
Then we just go to Dogcoin as our
Doge.
and Elon makes even more money.
Well-
they want that though. That's the thing is they are looking at trying to have that
They're
upset.
accelerationists.
The acceleration because it's going to allow them to do the takeover that they truly want to do.
I'll tell you right now, most of the world is going to start slowly ditching the dollar as a reserve currency, probably in favor of the euro. And so,
I mean, do you blame them? Like,
no,
look at the
I
chaos that's
don't.
going on.
And
over
we're
here.
going to lose a lot of economic advantages there. We're going to lose soft power advantages. I mean, Europe is going to learn to stand on its own finally.
We've only been as powerful as we have been is because the dollar has been the controlling currency across the world for
Yeah.
the last 80 years.
Yeah, some countries don't even mess with their own currency. They just trade American dollars.
Oh my gosh. Going to South Sudan, like, so I went to this hotel. I was at this hotel and I got this juice and it was like, oh, it's going to be $3. And I was like, okay, well, I gave them a $5 and they're like, you don't have like, they're like, do you want your change back? And I was like, yeah, I want my change back. What are you talking about? And they're like, you don't have $3. And I'm like, if I gave you guys $3 bills, you wouldn't take it. That's a weird thing. Like, so in South Sudan, I guess there's this overall like perception that Americans pay for everything in $100 bills. So it's like if you have one of the old hundreds, you know what I'm saying, before they went and blue, they won't take that because they think it doesn't work anymore.
Like counterfeit, maybe?
Yeah, and when I showed my cousin, like, you know, pennies, nickels, and dimes, he was like, you guys use that in America? And I'm like, yeah. I'm like,
do you mean?
America. I'm like, huh?
Oh, go ahead. I mean,
I'm like, what do you guys think America's like? You know what I mean? It's just like, yeah, I mean, like in some aspects it's great, but it's just like, this is just money. It all goes to ching. So it's like legal tender that you have to take. He's like, yeah, I didn't realize that. And I was paying for this hotel and I was giving him like these $100 bills. And you know, when you put a bill in your wallet, it like creases. So there was like a tiny tear, like literally like not even a centimeter. And he was like, yeah, do you have another one? I don't want to take this.
what is it? The rule here is as long as it's at least half of the bill, you can go exchange
get it
it at a bank.
replaced, yeah.
Yeah.
It just feels like every time I mean, I've visited Europe a handful of times, and every time I'm there,
have you been? I've never been.
I've been to Europe a couple of times. Yeah.
every time I'm there, I end up with inevitably 2 pockets full of coins because I feel like that's all I can get there. Coins, not bills.
You get a lot of.
It's just like, what do I do with all
I got a
this?
bunch of those.
Points.
So yeah, dude, Elon Musk is like controlling.
Yeah, President Elon Musk.
He's making a lot of decisions that shouldn't be
Yeah.
in his hands, but what do you do?
What was wild, I keep saying this, is like, it looked like he started this, and then Trump was like, oh, I gotta get in on this too. And it's like, get rid of the debt ceiling. It's like, they're not doing that, bud.
And
it's not happening.
They've also been calling for him to be the new Speaker of the House.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
you don't have to be
Marjorie Taylor Greene and Rand Paul. Yeah.
Yeah, except that he then would become third in line for the presidency,
Ooh, I didn't
which he
think about
is
that.
constitutionally incapable of.
Oh, because he wasn't.
He's not a natural born citizen.
not a natural-
And
Yes.
I asked you about that. So like the line of succession, what happens if there's somebody in the presidential
Skips
cabinet?
him.
Okay, so couldn't we just skip the Speaker of the House?
No, not if they're constitutionally eligible.
If,
but
if Musk were somehow able to get
First in
made
line.
Speaker and he was next in line constitutionally, when it got to him, because he would not be able to serve, they would
Senate pro-
bypass that and then go to the president pro tem of the Senate.
And who's that going to? It's probably going to be Grassley, isn't it? Or maybe he's just going to pass it.
I don't know
Grassley's
who the
94
president
years
pro
old.
tem is now.
He's been pro tem during Republican majorities several times.
Has he?
But the person who's the longest serving
Longest
senator
serving,
for the Democrats in the Senate passed on it and let the second longest go this last time.
Oh, okay.
But Grassley's the oldest one. Even more than, and you know what's funny is like he got reelected for his current term and he was like 92 years old, and his campaign funds and his campaign apparatus are still on file. He's leaving the door open to running again when he's like 98.
That's wild.
We need another Strom Thurmond.
Yeah. Oh,
Wheel him in. We need his vote.
remember, he ended up as a Republican, people, in the end.
What if Elon Musk really becomes Speaker of the House? That's going to be...
The House will not be able to do anything. Nothing. Because none of the Democrats are going to vote for anything he wants to see happen, and there's going to be too many spiteful Republicans to let that happen. It's like, this guy's an unelected...
So the possible... it's not going to happen.
Yeah, but he's also advocating for them to have the government shutdown last until Trump comes in a month later.
This is what I was telling Tommy the other day. Elon Musk doesn't get disconnect notices because we talked about how the government's shutdown like really affects everyday people. Mm-hmm. So the people who work in like the cafeteria on Capitol Hill, right? Like people who do those kind of jobs.
Except
janitors.
usually after they come back in, they all get their back pay, but they're put through shit while it's shut down because they can't make their payments.
Exactly.
They can't do these things.
So like because most of the country lives paycheck to paycheck. You know what I mean? So like you depend like that paycheck for a lot of people is a matter of life or death.
Yeah.
And it's sickening that they're playing politics with people's lives, but that's what they do.
Yeah, one of the major points of doing something like this is actually capture people as human beings. You know, we can do a 3-minute interview on 10/11 Now, and nobody really knows anything about you, or you can be humanized.
I mean, even when I did my interview at the convention, I never even mentioned that I was trans.
Okay.
What convention?
The Democratic National Convention.
Oh, you went to that?
Yeah, I was a delegate for Nebraska.
I think I saw you in the... Yeah, I saw you in the camera frame.
It was funny because after we did our vote, announced our vote, I had to go to the bathroom, and so did like Charlotte Swearinger, our national committee woman, and so we all ran upstairs, and we tried to get back down to our seats, and they wouldn't let us, and so they said we had to go down a couple. So I went down a couple, and we were headed down to the floor, and all of a sudden it got blocked off, and it was Ohio doing theirs, and so I ended up in cheering for Ohio.
Okay, way to go, Ohio.
I had a friend say, text me going, I just saw you on TV. What are you doing with the Ohio delegation?
You know, I was like, this is a benign thing. This is a picky thing. When it was time to do Nebraska's roll call, like everybody's doing these great songs that have something to do with their state. And then ours was Katy Perry's Firework. And it's just like Lady Gaga, you and I, the Nebraska guy. Come on, man.
Oh yeah.
Come on.
That was really fun. Like Tommy and I were texting
Or,
during
come on,
it.
what about Springsteen, Nebraska?
Oh, isn't that one like, that one's a little down.
A little down?
This is Starkweather's, right?
Yeah, it's about Charlie Starkweather.
Yeah.
The convention looked because I watched both the RNC and the DNC. Yeah. The DNC just looks so lit. Like
It was. We
so much
had
fun.
incredible energy there, and it was.
I let it
Little
go to my head.
John?
I let it go to my head.
It fooled me.
I mean, I always tell people that nobody cares what a celebrity thinks. And I was in that down in the dumps when it was still Biden, like the morale was completely through the basement. And since we shot up in enthusiasm, I let it go to my head again, thinking, oh yeah, everybody loves this. And then some time got away from it. And when they were doing, like, Oprah was doing spots and Beyonce was doing spots at rallies, and I was just like, nobody cares what celebrities think.
Some people do.
I'm sorry, when it comes to politics, no.
No, some people do. I mean, like when Taylor Swift told people to go register.
Taylor
and,
Swift
like,
had an impact in getting people registered.
Sure.
like
Whether
record-
they actually showed up and voted or not
Yeah.
is
Yeah, there needs to be a
issue.
more easier way to just have people vote.
In some places, there is easy ways. There's some places they have universal vote by mail. You have no option. Ballot gets
They
sent
send
to
you
you.
your ballot and you send it back.
Yep. Or you don't have to send it back. You can keep it, but I mean, it's there.
Do you have to pay
It's
for
convenient.
postage?
No,
No.
Oregon, Washington.
That's literally like
California,
you're
right?
all-
California, I don't know if it's mandatory or not. I think you may have to request it. Last time I voted in California was 4 years ago, 3 years ago, and I enjoy going to the polls generally and voting, but this year was the first year I voted early, and I shortly after we could start voting, I went down to the Elections Commission in Douglas County and voted.
Was there? Am I remembering this right? That you wanted to have like a bid for the legislature?
I was seriously considering running against Calth.
Yeah.
And I explored it, and I didn't feel that I was going to get probably the support that I was going to need to be able to do that. And I can understand why some people would be reluctant, because coming in from out of state and not having been involved in the political process for a long period of time,
Sure.
would lead some people to be, a little less than enthusiastic. I knew I was going to get the allegation of being a carpetbagger. I mean,
well, that didn't stop some people.
Calth in a podcast that she did with a gal from Australia talked about, oh yes, there's this man from Los Angeles who's going to run against me, and
So it was Fulcher who ended up.
it was Marianne Fulcher who ended up running, and then she ended up, I think, with not being able to devote as much time as I think she would have liked, and all of us would have liked to the campaign, because she is a caretaker for her brother who has developmental disabilities, and there were a lot of issues that came up with him during the year that required her attention.
From what I understand, and this is just based on rumors, she was like she could have had competition from the Democratic Party, but some conversations were had to clear her away from it. And so that's just a little bit of gossip, but people kind of know me as like the numbers Democrat, I guess. I love looking at partisan voter indexes. I love looking at historical results and how gerrymandered a district might be. And some people came to me and they were like, how do you feel about this person's chances? And I told them straight, nope, it's not going to happen. And when the primary happened, I went from 99% to 100% sure.
Yeah, she
And
did not do well in the primary.
People yelled at me because I wasn't going to have the toxic optimism. And I was just like, here's the numbers. I'm sorry. Could she do an amazing performance? It's happened before, sure. Not likely. If I had to put money on it, she's going to lose. And what was crazy is and I don't know if this is true, perhaps you do because of your proximity to it. I was being told that a lot of outside money came out against Calth, right?
There was some, yeah.
Yeah, it was for the legislative race.
There was a lot of negative Calth advertising that I saw from other parties,
and it reminds me of the person who ran against Mitch McConnell last. It was like Amy McGrath. She was a colonel in the military, and she was like the liberal heartthrob, and I was like, she was getting a lot of money. And this happens every cycle. Alred, the guy who ran against Ted Cruz.
Colin Alred?
It happens every cycle where all this money pours in from grassroots donations thinking, oh, this is it. We're going to beat this Republican lion. And it just never pans out. No.
I mean, I think I would have stood a better chance against Kath than Marianne did, because I actually have some right-wing background.
Yeah. I don't want to ask, but I'm curious to see how her ground game was, because ground game will close all kinds of gaps.
She had a okay ground game. I think it could have been better. But
because we were talking about Ashley Spivey and how she was able to win with less than $30,000.
Yeah. And she wore out pair after pair.
Yeah,
after pair
she was out and doing that. And I realized that was something I was going to have to do, and I didn't know if I had enough energy at the age that I am now. I'm the same age as Carol Blood. So
dude, I'm only 33, and my knees and my tendons and stuff.
But there was also, I think I got a certain amount of pushback because of the Vargas campaign, and whether, having a trans woman running in the district would.
Unfortunately, I saw a lot of that.
I definitely felt that.
In a time when most down ballot Democrats outperformed Harris, to see him underperform Harris, very unique situation. And, I didn't pay too much attention to the race, but what I thought, just kind of doing a quick deep dive, is he stayed completely away from the issue of abortion. I just don't think I don't recall him talking about it at all. I should probably go back to try to do more homework, but I think that he just kind of skirted a very important topic.
And that was one of the issues that I was going to run on, was the fact that we needed to protect. And we did such a horrible job of not explaining the difference between the good initiative and
those last 2 weeks were brutal,
and the one that Ricketts bought.
They for the last 2 weeks they hammered misinformation home.
And people believed it, and
I think they were confused.
I don't think people in the state realize that there can be a total ban on abortion in the state of Nebraska, even though we have that constitutional amendment.
I mean, in the end, it was really confusing, and you got to think about Nebraska's sort of bipolar voting tendencies. Like, we've passed Medicare expansion, we've passed minimum wage increase, we've passed paid sick leave, legal marijuana, medical marijuana, and it's like we aren't this conservative red state ideologically like people like to make us out to be. And it's just like, the core Republican conservative policy of Medicare expansion, of course we're a red state. And it's just like, in the end, I think that if there was not as much misinformation, I think you probably see something. But here's the good news: protect our rights. They can't go again for another 3 years, but they wouldn't want to go again for another 3 years. So in 4 years, they're probably going to come back, and they don't have to deal with any other challenges.
Unless Ricketts buys
they'll
one.
But I'm saying there's not going to be another confusing ballot, a dueling ballot situation, where there's one that's...
Oh, there may. I mean, no, you have no idea what Ricketts will do to...
just try to go for like a 6-week ban or something like that.
To avoid the issue. Yeah.
Perhaps. Yeah.
It's like, when I heard that he did that, I was like, that is a fucking great political move on the part of them to do that, because that is going to... because it's going to... A constitutional amendment is going to pass. And
if it gets its due.
So they did the most screwed up one they could possibly get for us to take away the rights. But I am still just outraged that they pulled that shit off. Because that is so wrong.
That media campaign there at the end, I was just thinking, like, this is not good.
And being an old consumer protection lawyer, and about truth in advertising and all of that, that's one of the things I hate about political advertising, is they get away with being able to lie. And whereas if you can sell President Trump, tell all the lies you want to about him, but if you're trying to sell, President Trump soda water, you have to accurately depict what that soda water is, and you can get in trouble for misrepresenting it, but you can't get in trouble for misrepresenting Donald Trump.
God bless
and that's
America.
Scary.
All right. Well, Jessie, thank you so much for coming on. It was
Thank
really,
you. I had a great time. Oh, God, we covered so many different subjects.
We
I'm
did.
That's
like,
the point. Yeah.
We did, and we hope you'll come back the next time, and maybe during the legislature too, when things are kind of in the swing.
when we get a better idea of what it is that we're going to be facing and what the
Yeah.
actual language of these potential statutes are.
For sure.
But yeah, I mean, I've loved going and testifying in front of the legislature. I mean, I testified on changing, exclusion of jurors for voir dire because of their LGBTQ plus status. But I also testified about 340B money to nonprofits and how that's beneficial for them, and the only thing that allows some of the rural healthcare things to be able to survive. So it's much more than just the trans issues that I want to testify about this coming session, because there's so much that they're doing that affects us in so many ways.
Sure.
And we've had 25 or 30 years of total Republican leadership in the state. You would think that if they had the answers, we would have gotten some of them by now, but we haven't. And so we have to keep the feet to the fire, and we've got to start recruiting some better candidates for some of the legislative races and try to get some changes made. And, if we can do it one person at a time, we got to do it one person at a time.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in, and be sure to give this a like and a thumbs up, and also share and comment below to keep the conversation going about all the different things that we've talked about. And yeah, Jesse, we hope to have you back soon. Thank you so much.
Go Big Red.
Go. They were threatening to primary people.
Yeah.
And they got scared.
So I have a bit of a different take. They kind of had a point when it came to, there's a lot of stuff in here that just does not have anything to do with the funding. That's not the scary part. The scary part is that Elon Musk could just tank it with a few tweets.
Yeah.
That's the scary part.